The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very, can I emphasize very enough, special guest, Adam Camilleri from our sister podcast, Art of War Down Under. Adam, how are you doing?
G'day, mate. And I prefer the aged world-traveling uncle podcast.
The well-traveled uncle podcast. I think that's a fair name for it. So for those of you who don't listen to Art of War Down Under, you absolutely should. Adam does a great job reviewing all the different content that comes out around Warhammer 40K, and we love supporting his show, and he does a great job just, repping Art of War. But he's also been around the block, and he's from Australia, which gives him bonus points. He's been around the block for so long that he has seen the game change and evolve, and he's adapted more than anyone. So with that in mind, right now we're experiencing a time of unprecedented change in the middle of an edition. Every single army is getting a brand new detachment. We just got a balanced data slate. We just got a Minotaur field manual. There's more changes happening than ever before. So we got Adam on the show, and we're going to talk to him and just have a discussion about how to adapt to change, how the game has evolved over time, kind of directionally how it's going, and how you, the viewer, can kind of keep your head on straight when all these crazy changes are happening, and keep your head on and just carry forward playing Warhammer.
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming. And I know so many members of the community come to Warhammer bringing different skills, different attributes, at times different, possibly mental health conditions, different abilities and ways in which they absorb information. And I get overwhelmed sometimes. I find, anxiety, ADHD, especially, I go through periods of hyper focus where I can, absorb intense amounts of information and then absolute abject uninterest with what is occurring, despite it possibly being very relevant. And I hope that's something that echoes and people can relate to as well. But yeah, we are into, I guess the only other time because we're right now, what we're experiencing is essentially just shy of a new edition. Just below the amount of information you'd have to absorb should a new edition come out.
Yeah.
You can almost look like, because the game isn't being indexed, so you're not quite getting a new rule set for each faction, but each faction is getting a facelift. There's like a patch fix on each faction, and in addition, all the balance has been redone, all the points have been redone, and it is absolutely a deluge. And some people love getting in the mud, and I'm pretty much every member of the Art of War crew just like pig in their sty. Yes. Let's absorb all this goodness and disseminate it and discuss it. But I know so many members of the community are just like, I don't know what's going on.
well, that's the thing, Adam. I mean, like you've been around the block for so long, and ultimately, like, you and I live in the content world for Warhammer 40K. So we know what's going on. We keep up with all the different rules that release. We have people constantly talking about it. We're in God knows how many Discords about it. But for like the average player, or like even like the semi-competitive average player, it's 26 factions. Then there's also the points for all the factions. They're not going to read all these attachments, know how to build lists for them, all that stuff. Where do you go when you have such a foundational shakeup? Like, how? Not saying like where do you go Art of War? That's obvious, but where do you go like mentally to try to even unpack all this? How do you approach it?
So I think that you got to narrow your vision, put the blinkers on almost, and just refocus on the things that are relevant to you. If you're constantly worrying about what your neighbor can do, what your regular sparring partner can do, or who's going to be taking what to the next event, that is just going to leave you absolutely in the weeds, overwhelmed, and probably building bad lists. You have to refocus onto the things you play and the things you enjoy about the game more above than anything else. Like if you are a faction specialist, or if you are even I call them phase specialists as well, which is a new term that's starting to be adopted. I may have just coined it here. This may be the first time you're hearing it.
What is a phase specialist? I've never heard of this.
You think about somebody who's a dedicated Tau player, but then they also play guard. Technically, they play a huge amount of 40K, but the phase that they're specialized in is a shooting phase. So you are a phase specialist. So either the skill set you developed on guard or Tau can be adapted to, say, an Ironstorm Space Marine army. It can be adapted to
I could see that.
A shooting-based, Chaos Space Marine faction, or right. a multitude of different others. Because one of the great things they've done about 10th edition, and I suppose we're only really in a place where 10th edition has evolved and siloed the game so much that like everybody gets a shooting detachment, everyone gets a melee detachment, everyone gets an XYZ detachment, a vanguard detachment, an uppy downy detachment, something like that. And so we're starting to get these phase specialists. Like I've got mates who play Tau and Tyranids for let's say, and they're like a movement specialist, because those are the two things that those two factions have in common, and so their skill sets translate, even though they both have shooting bases. Tyranid is very multimodal, but Jack Harpster, Anthony Vanilla. Anthony Vanilla's a great one. He's a combat phase specialist. Doesn't matter which faction he's playing. If that's a combat tilted faction, his skill set will be able to pick it up and wield it very effectively. And 10th edition's giving us that. So refocus yourself on what's important for you and the factions that you play. And then if you look at it like, so I've been playing Astra Militarum, as people know, been playing Astra Militarum for most of the last 12 months, in addition to, Dark Angels. So if I wanted to refocus on me and what I do in my skill set, I would look to the things. I would firstly, of course, look to Astra Militarum. Just got a new detachment. Hey, how you doing? It's really good. And look at the things that are comparable to that. So once I've absorbed what Astra Militarum can do, I then look at the factions that are similar to that. And then I get the comparisons, I get the way things differently, etc. Because if you just look at if you want to compare apples and oranges, you can look at World Eaters versus Tau, and you can have completely different perspectives. And those things aren't going to align in your brain as well as, say, comparing, like I said, Tau to Guard.
Yeah, I think you can also look at it. The game didn't have to change, right? It's not like
no, it didn't.
This replaced the old rules. This is just an augmentation to it. So while there might be 26 attachments, let's assume like half of them are not actually better than their index variation or whatever the codex medalist is. So you're not really going to see like many of them. And then for the few that are actually like really quality, we're going to really unpack where we think the meta is in part 2 of this conversation. But Adam, what do you think are the top dogs just coming out of it detachment wise so far?
Yeah, so for like the two best, well, obviously there is some, we can always talk about this as well. There's almost a rich getting richer happening here, as in addition to a lot of mid and bottom, perspective factions getting a bit of a lift. So the two strongest for the strongest factions is, in my opinion, like I said, Guard and Necrons, but then Demons. Holy crap.
Demons got some love. They're my favorite army. They got 4 brand new detachments. Oh, and a Screamer glow up. Like, I love this right now. Where do you rank the Demons? I'm curious.
So if you were to take out units, if you just look at it in a vacuum as just face value what the detachments give, the Khorne and Slaanesh detachments are probably the 2 best detachments they've done. So far, they're probably the 2 most powerful, well-rounded, doing things so much better than everybody else detachments. But then when you put it in context of the units you end up using, the logistics of actually playing a game, arguably, probably the Guard and the Necrons are arguably better, because you're working with better chassis, better units, better material.
That's an interesting breakdown for it, and I don't disagree at all. There is a stark difference between putting reroll hits and reroll wounds on a unit in Demons than there is in say Chaos Space Marines, right? It's totally different. Yeah.
Yeah, spot on. And while I think those detachments are freaking exceptional, and people are going to have, Demon players are going to have such a field day and playing, oh my God, Mono God is back. You can play Mono God and not feel like a joke, is pretty much what they were trying to do with these detachments, even though you can take whatever demons you want in whatever detachments. I still think if you take the Zinj detachment, you probably take Flesh Hounds or whatever, because you need what they bring.
I can't imagine playing a demon army that doesn't have a unit of plague bearers in it right now, just to
correct.
Hold your
exactly right. Exactly right. But so for what you got to look at it in context. So what the Guard detachment does, and this comes back to the rich getting richer, and for Necrons as well. Literally the evergreen faction of the game, Necrons, can't refuse to let them be bad even for a heartbeat. So that's the rich getting richer effect, where we have a very strong faction with a huge swathe of playable units and different play styles therein, and then they just get kind of better.
Do you think we're going to see this new Star Shatter, Guns Go Bird detachment actually outshine Hypercrypt because of all the uppy downy nonsense it can do?
So straight up, I think, and I'll try and say this as cleanly as possible, I think the stat checky mid-table annihilation that Star Shatter can do, we'll see it get good results, but it won't win events, is my hot take. I think Hypercrypt is much better for winning events, but has a harder path to get there. So generalship-wise matters here between this comparison because Hypercrypt is a general's army, 100%. Like you can win any game of 40k with Hypercrypt if you are that good at it, because it has every tool at your fingertips. You can score every card. You know, it gets a little bit harder to play the primary, and so primary denial more than scoring your own primary is what's impactful. But then on the other extent, you can just unga freaking bunga, -1 damage, Silent King with Feel No Pain straight through a wall and blow someone's face off and just win the game.
Right. You can make an unkillable Silent King and just drive your opponent. That's pretty good.
Correct. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I can tell you it's not. But the people who can handle that have been handling similar things like that for a lot of 10th edition. You know, 10th edition, we haven't quite had Death Stars, but we've had ultra durable threatening units for the entire edition. And so that's my hot take on Star Shadow is it will get you to a top table, but it will win you less of them.
So you actually covered something really interesting there, and it kind of ties back to your first point about there being different archetypes and ways to kind of classify players' strengths and weaknesses, right? You mentioned Anthony as a combat master. You could be a shooting specialist, or the different play styles within the game, as well as faction specialties, and kind of looking at those overlays. So with that kind of perspective, and obviously you've watched tons of Warhammer as a commentator, what trends have you seen? Not necessarily like army lists that do well, but what play styles have you been seeing doing really well throughout the 10th edition? And then where do you see the meta-headed play style wise in terms of shooting, melee, movement? Where do you think the game is going?
I think 10th edition is, if you had to classify it, is a movement-based edition. We've had editions, 7th edition was literally a stat check edition. 8th edition was much more of a damage check. And I think 10th edition started out as that as well. Of course, we had Custodes GSC, Eldari, Wraith Knights, who were just like, lol, you don't get to play, I get to play 40k. And now we've evolved into kind of this middle section of 10th edition where I believe the game is like 80% movement based. Essentially, everyone has enough resources, and every army almost has enough resources to 1-for-1 trade their opponents' pieces. And we've seen pieces that in the army, in the game that kind of exceeded that. And I call them. We had a little blip on the radar there for about 6 months where we had what I call the super heavy infantry phase of 10th edition, where it was Bulgrin, Deathwing Knights, things of that etc. Like that extent, where you would have like a durable chassis with 3 levels of defensive buffs, 2+ armor contempt kind of units. And now we're into, like, really the game is won and lost movement phase. Like, we can truly sit here and say that because of the way the primary works in all the missions, because of the way the secondaries work in all the missions, movement, flexibility, maybe flexibility is the way I should describe it. Like flexibility of gameplay, adaptability on the table is really becoming king, rather than just taking, like I said, because if we were in a damage check environment, the Star Shadow would be the best army in the game. It would straight up just be the best army in the game because it is more durable than is reasonable for the points that you pay for the models. It has all the damage in the world, and it gets to go through freaking walls and advance and shoot and all that stuff.
And not only that, but when you're seeing the top armies performing and like list after list after list, like they've always have an amount of like skirmishy, trashy stuff that just really helps you mission around and solve those types of problems.
Yeah, and that's exactly the trap that I see for the Star Shadow list I've seen so far, is that you're almost priced into not having utility units. So you're priced into having a critical mass of damage on durable chassis with freaking involves. And that therefore you become exposed to the movement game of your opponent. If your opponent just plays a good enough movement game, they can just beat you. And we saw that kind of when the Sisters started to take over, the Sisters being well-rounded enough that they had a swathe of utility units in addition to things like Vargons, which is still probably the last thing in the game. One of the last things in the game that's purely like and perfectly well-rounded, as in like it's a shooting threat, it's a melee threat, it's a charge threat, it's a positional threat via rapid ingress, deep strike, strat reserve, stuff like that. There's so few of those units left because everything's kind of getting a bit more specialized. And I mean, if you were to go and look back at, say, the best lists from 8th edition, and then the best lists from 9th edition, and then the best lists from 10th edition. I can't say this definitively, but my gut instinct is our lists right now are so more well-rounded than they've ever been before. I mean, you still get your triple castigators.
You can even see like the way armies looked at win tournaments kind of looks like it's right out of a codex. Like it's like, this is what they actually wanted.
So you've been playing for pretty much as long as I have, and you remember say 3rd and 4th edition, you'd have your one tactical squad, you'd have your one devastator squad, you'd have a single predator and a single box dreadnought, and bada bing, bada boom, you got a list. Like that was what an army used to look like. And then in 8th edition, especially at the start of 8th edition, things got very silly. People taking 13 Tau commanders and 8 hive tyrants to an Adepticon that resulted in the rule of 3 being invented.
Right.
And ever since then, list construction has kind of gotten better and better and better, where people would have to min-max their damage, but also have to min-max their scoring ability and their ability to play the game. And I think we're almost at a perfect equilibrium, especially with things like Bulgren, like I said, Deathwing Knights being less incentivized, even though I do think they're still quite good. Actually, less good on the Bulgren. You can't order them anymore. So Bulgren down. The Deathwing Knights might be the last super heavy infantry that you can take.
Yeah. There's a huge diversity also in not just the what your army looks like, but what the game looks like, right? There are tank lists that are doing well. There are
correct
infantry lists that are doing well. There are actually hordes and elite armies, and there's bikes, but there's typically been a archetype of unit. Like cavalry is a great example of something that doesn't go through walls, so it kind of sucks and doesn't interact with the rules of Warhammer well. But you really don't see that in modern Warhammer. It's almost every unit has purpose, and even if it doesn't have purpose, it works as a cheap little squad. The only time you really don't have something at purpose, if you can find something very comparable to it, stat wise and rule wise, for a cheaper cost.
Exactly right. Yeah, and there is that effect of 10th edition. This is one of the things I said at the start of the edition when I saw their I guess the siloed design. This is what I call the detachment design that we have for 10th edition now. It's kind of siloed. You're siloed into, cool. I pick Vanguard Space Marines, and then almost a full list populates into your app of the logical things that you will take. And I suppose that can be looked at as a downside or a good side for the sake of the edition. It makes list construction for newer players extremely more accessible and understandable, because I think this was in the hallowed days of BiffPod back in the day. I think Colin Sherman said a line where he said, "I love it when the rules tell me what units to take," where you would have a stratagem that only works on Gene Stealers. Overrun in 8th edition only worked on Gene Stealers. So cool, I guess I'm taking Gene Stealers. And we do have that very much in effect, but expanded, pretty much just in a detachment. It will tell you what to take. But then you have things like a Space Marine Scout, things like we just said, like Mandrakes, Plague Bearers, these utility units that kind of break out of those siloed chains and spread across, because they're just good enough utility to be worth taking regardless of the archetype.
That makes a lot of sense. There's just these types of utility units is a role now. They're actions have kind of been that. It's a real job that you just take units that kind of do shit jobs. And you know what else I think has really become more commonly adapted as a tactic that I think not only is highlighted in all the people we interview all the time because of what they use to win the tournaments tactically, but what has become commonplace is move blocking, screening. People just when I say do perform a move block to stop somebody from going there, the average player knows what I'm saying. They know how to do that. Correct. That's pretty crazy. Yeah.
And if I had to talk about the phase of the game where the player base has gotten better, it is the movement phase. And that is the extent. So much of 10th edition is in trading, as it is in forcing trades with your opponent, exposure, overexposure, tempo, when to try and give your opponent a 5 on primary versus you trying to get a 15, stuff like that. And that's all executed through the movement phase. The best units in people's armies are the utility units. A faction in my mind lives and dies on how good its utility units are. You can take almost every faction. I will say almost any faction, AdMech not being one, can take enough damage in their army to just table opponents. You can just, if you want, take enough of Control-C, Control-V good profile to, dominate and kill people when you can shoot and kill them. The thing is, tables are so good right now, and players are so good at not getting shot and killed, because we've been through 2 editions of every time you get shot, you died, that people are just playing extremely good positional 40k. And it's really good to watch. It's really good to experience, and it makes for very engaging games.
Pre-measuring has also become a lot more commonplace, in that it used to be, on lower tables, it's still uncommon, but in a lot of places it is, everything's pre-measured. The molecules of the board are pre-measured. So there's not only no gotchas, and the culture of it is obviously improved, but the the precision with which you are making your plays and the calculations you're doing in terms of positioning is there's a micro game and a macro game instead of just a macro game.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, statement I'll just throw out there. Up until this year, I had never lost round one of a tournament. Never.
Oh, man.
Not
same,
once.
Same. I just lost round one of a tournament recently.
Correct. And that just shows the growth of the community. I lost round one, I think, like 3 or 4 times this year. And there was some other factors. I actually did a whole podcast on my
I'm
show.
surprised you played 3 or 4 round ones this year.
I played. People don't know this about me. I went to Nova this year and played in the RTT teams event with a couple of other lovely gentlemen who may or may not be associated with Art of War. And 2 of my opponents said, like, I didn't know you could play. I didn't know you played 40K. I thought you were just a personality. And I beat both their asses. I was like, you what?
Man can talk and play, apparently.
I have definitely gotten worse at the playing side of things, but I can still roll some dice. I mean, you and I could both probably do a podcast on this, having to balance, trying to still
looks like, yeah.
No, well, gentle retirement. We need to stay good enough at the game that when we talk, it makes sense and people understand it. But also, we have to divide all our time between doing stuff like this and staying sharp.
Speak for yourself, Adam. I beat Jack Harpster literally 2 days ago.
Well, I don't have a Jack Harpster to beat 2 days ago. I wish I did. I love
That's
the boy.
Okay. We're just talking shit.
We are just talking some bad shit. All right, so where were we at with that question? So the growth of the community, I 100%, and I mean, hopefully Art of War, as a business, has been a big proponent of this. You guys have been putting out content for years trying to help people understand and grow as players. And, the game is better. The game is better and the players are better. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that for the first time in a long time, I think we're finally at a place where tables very much can balance the meta. Like
that's a huge component, right? Like back in the day, tables, and I say back in the day, I mean as young as like 2020, 2021, those types of years. So for like most of 40K's existence, you've been playing with like this styrofoam hill and this like rink-a-dink ruin, and you're just in the open. Sucks to be you. You're getting shot. So
yeah, correct.
Like in times where the game was worse written, to compensate for that, you had to find these ridiculous combos for unkillable units and teleporting armies, and that existed, strangely enough. So the game kind of found this weird balance, and like the shooting armies just insta-tabled you, and you're either like the shooting army that insta-tables people when it goes first, or you're the victim who just dies, or you're playing some broken combo army that can counter it. And it's like this stupid rock, paper, scissors thing. And that has largely gone away. Like now, armies have counters and hard counters and whatever, but the meta is so diverse. Like you can look at it globally, you can look at it nationally, whatever you're at. The different diversity in terms of what is winning tournaments. The only consistent factor I can see that of recent history is that good players that are faction experts or like have been on their thing, know their scenarios, their flexibility, necessary moves, as you put it, they can adapt the best. That's the people who win the tournaments, is what I've seen. Like people in the meta playing all the reps.
I 100% agree with that. I do think there's a great statement to be able to say that faction expertise matters now, because I mean, for the longest time, right? At the start of 10th edition, this will be a funny one. How much better than every other army, like percentage wise, how much better was Eldari and GSC than every other army in the game?
Oh, that's so true.
How much better was it?
I mean, I don't know the number, but like it was insane.
Hundreds of percent better than everyone else. When one demo throw from an acolyte was like a game-ending, it's a game-ending interaction. One fate
and the whole army automatically came back 3 inches away, up and down.
Yeah, and 1/6 on an Overwatch with a Wraith Knight was a game-ending. 1 CP to Overwatch, 1/6 on a Fate dice. I still roll my other dice. I might get another 6. Was a game-ending interaction. Those things were hundreds of percentile better than the next best army in the game, which was Custodes at the time. And now, like the best armies, maybe they're 20% better. And the gap. So I just did a tier list a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this. Like Sisters was the Sisters and Guard were the S tiers, and we were considering like, so their faction win rates and their T whip and their over rep and stuff like that was like, wasn't like even 50%, 60% better than the worst factions. You know, we're getting so much more narrower on what can perform. And I mean, Skari is a perfect example of how to get an army completely destroyed by continuing to do well with it.
Yeah, literally. Poor Drukhari did not deserve the nerf number 55 that Skari's given him.
Correct. The Skari has resulted in the Void Raven Bomber. Whoever thought? But that's what I mean. Like, so Skari has rolled with all the punches. I don't believe. I mean, even though public opinion has been that Drukhari has been one of the better armies at times in the meta, they've never been, I believe, the best army in the meta, and they've never been, in my mind, as dominant as they were for a whole freaking year of 9th edition, where and yet, like, he puts up wins. Like, faction expertise is an absolute thing that matters, and I love that. That's one of my favorite things about 40K, is seeing these little shining lights of people who are just dedicated to their craft and continue to find ways to win.
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40K. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of dice.
Well, I want to highlight that too, because I think so much of it can be like prescribed to regional success. And like someone like Skari is a great example because he plays in the frozen north of Canada and he's been on the show a bunch of times in our war coach. And you can definitely like look at Skari's competition and be like, well, Skari's not playing against the top competition in the world. So when he wins, maybe there's an asterisk next to it. And then you just have to really look deep down when you looked at, no, Skari does go to WCC and he does go to WCW. He's trying to win the ITC next year. And to do that, you have to bring down like the toughest competition.
Yeah,
and
correct.
That tough competition does know how to counterplay Drukhari. They do know what your tricks are. They know what you're up to. So like to assume that you're just gotching your opponent in a polite way because they were inexperienced is just certainly not accurate. So it's just kind of inspiring to see that someone can do so well in an army that has basically playing with its index and is so well known.
Well, and there's even beyond that. So the GSC is a great example. Once again, the GSC Codex came out much maligned on release. No one rated it. No one said there was even a quality build there that could push a top table. That didn't change, but then I think it was about 3 GSC faction experts just brewed on that faction long enough, and then like 4 months after the faction came out, a thing that already existed for 4 months was born, and they started.
I will say the one thing with the GSC example is that they did get an FAQ change that like stealth updated because it like happened during the WTC time, so no one paid attention to it because lists were locked.
Yep.
Which allowed you to just like go into reserves after dying instead of being forced into the buff system.
Yeah, forced into the So then you could just wrap it and go straight back in and stuff like that if the timing was right.
You just got to use your units. That was a huge change to the army's functionality.
Correct.
But it goes to say, like, the frequency with which they change the rules too, right? Like the game's constantly evolving. It used to be you had like 2-3 years before you got new rules. If you had shit codex, like, sucks to be you.
Dude, yeah, man. Like, I mean, we were in 7th and 8th edition. Like, 8th edition, of course, was indexed, but in 7th edition, like, we were playing with 5th edition codexes in 7th edition and stuff like that. That was how far you could go between drinks, like getting getting your faction some freshness. And now it's rare to go like 4 months without something changing for your faction. And that circles us back to our first topic, like how do you keep up? How do you stay current? And how do you deal with an ever-evolving game? Because some people absolutely love it. And I will say that I believe quite a few people have gotten off the competitive kind of roller coaster because of such changes, because their inability. I mean, if you are somebody out there, who plays, half a dozen games a year, maybe goes to one event a year, stuff like that. It's hard. It's hard to rock up to your mate's garage on, every once every 2 months to play a couple of games, and then have to be like, oh, I didn't know every one of my points changed twice since my last game, and my units no longer work how they did in the codex. That's overwhelming. That's absolutely overwhelming.
The app definitely helps a lot with that, right? Because it just happens in your phone. That I think is the only reason that this exists the way it does currently. But yeah, I can totally see it's overwhelming. I do this professionally, Adam. You do too, obviously, and still it's overwhelming for us. Like, I can only imagine what a casual player's experience is with these rules changes.
Yeah, and like I said, my advice is to put the blinkers on, willingly ignore irrelevant information to your faction and just focus on what matters to you first. And then naturally you'll absorb a bunch of extra stuff via osmosis, via playing games, interacting, talking with your mates. You'll absorb a bunch of other things that have changed via osmosis. And then once you're comfortable with what's changed for your faction, you can expand upon there. Where do you start? If you were let's just say you're a Ultramarines player. You just got a huge amount of changes. Would you start trying to absorb the rules changes or the points changes first?
I mean, you got to look at the rules changes, and that's just contextual change. But then after that, the points are what you're going to build with and play with the whole time. So you're going to become intimate with the points regardless. You just need to know what the rules changes are. So I think they go together, to be honest. I don't really think
That's
doing
fair.
one without the other makes much sense.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
So I had another question for you.
That's okay, Adam. Usually I'm the one interviewing the guest.
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally okay. I'm here for it. No one ever asked me questions. This is nice.
No, you go. Yeah, I'm still trying to think of what it was.
Okay. So Adam, what armies are you excited to play going into the future? What armies do you think are going to do really well?
Oh, so very different question. So what armies I think are going to do well? Guards going to continue to do well. Sisters are going to take about a month off and then be back to the upper end of the meta, probably not the top. But they're going to have to go back to the drawing board because I'm not quite sure Bringers is going to be the way now. It still might be the way, but people are going to have to figure that out and test it and weigh it up against Hallowed Martyrs again. Maybe even Army of Faith. Some people are absolutely buck wild out there. I still like the rules of Army of Faith. It's just the logistics of making those rules matter when you're playing a game is quite, I would say it's burdened with terms and conditions.
Well, not only that, but the new Miracle Dice change has become quite painful. I played one game with it already, and you really have way fewer Miracle Dice than before. And for an army from Army of Faith, which is it helps you generate them, but also the rule is use 2 Miracle Dice. You don't have 2 Miracle Dice.
Correct.
That's just not a thing.
Yeah. I would like to see that change to 1 Miracle Dice because of the Miracle Dice change, and then it would really start taking off. Necrons are going to be doing extremely well. They're going to be stat checking people in the mid tables, and they're still going to be pushing top tables. I would not be surprised to see with the Wraiths going down in points for some reason. I would not be surprised to see a return to Canoptic Court possibly popping up again, and also what's their index detachment reanimation.
I forget
Awakened
what it's
Dynasty.
called, but it's all Awakened Dynasty. That's right.
Yeah, because they can still make one of the single most durable units that can go through walls in the game, like the Crypto Thrall with Poland had it in WTC, the Crypto Thrall plus full unit of Wraiths. That could still be a thing. That could still definitely pop up in a bunch of different lists. Of course, it's best in Awakened Dynasty. So Necrons are going to continue to do very well. Like I said, Guard's going to do very well. We know there's Codex coming sometime in the first quarter of next year, as well as Eldari coming in the first quarter of next year. So that would be a very interesting one to watch. So you can kind of bet money that Eldari is going to be good, because I think the last time they got a Codex that didn't come out and immediately shoot them to the top of the meta was, never. So definitely Eldari could be on the rise as well. Then,
they're getting their new codex soon too, so that's going to be exciting.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. When was the last time they got a codex and they weren't really good?
Oh yeah. I got you.
Never.
Absolutely.
Exactly never.
Right.
They've never gotten a codex and stayed where they were in the meta. They've only gone up. And last one is Astartes, vanilla Astartes, and also codex compliant Astartes. I also think Dark Angels, Blood Angels still in very fine positions. Space Wolves may be dropping off a little bit comparatively to the rest, and of course Templars are pretty much in the same boat as Space Wolves. But Codex compliant Astartes is the hot number at the moment because, of course, Guard, Sisters, Necrons are already kind of at the top of the meta. This is a faction that was at the bottom of the meta and could be jumped right to the top. I know John Lennon and myself have been chatting a lot about, especially Ultramarines. And we are of the opinion that they are in an extremely good place with a multitude of different detachments. Gladius, Vanguard, Ironstorm, all offering extremely strong options depending on, what your meta is, what your terrain setup is, etc.
I'm super excited for this. The game seems like really wide right now, and it only seems to be getting better. This kind of segues us nicely to part 2 of the conversation. That's where Adam and I are going to continue to discuss basically what we think the meta is, but really dive deep, not only the detachments, but kind of the concepts of our army list as a whole. We're going to talk about different lists, different builds, and kind of tier list out where the game is right now. You can subscribe to patreon.com/AOW40K. $5 a month gets you access to this episode and 270 other part 2s. In this one, Adam and I are going to go through the meta. In other ones, we go through different tournament winners and their experiences. And in all of them, you get access to our Discord server where you can talk to me, Adam, or other coaches directly and message them whatever you like and surround yourself with some of the best 40K players out there. We can't do the show without you. We really appreciate your support. So thank you so much for supporting the show. Adam, I have one more question for you before I let you go.
Yes.
If you had one piece of advice for an aspiring 40K player, what would it be?
Aim high, but put away the whip. So aim high, try and do the best that you can at all times, especially if you're an aspiring, like I said, aspiring competitive player. Aim high, set yourself big goals, but do not beat yourself up. Do not flagellate yourself. Do not friggin' harm yourself in any way, mental health wise, because of the toy soldiers and what they did to you or didn't do to you on the tabletop. The best thing you can do is be like, I'm going to try and go 4-1 at this five round GT and set yourself up for success by studying, researching, and making the best possible list you can. But if you don't, and this is the pitfall that I have fallen into and many have fallen into, especially in a lot of ways. If you don't reach your brass rings, and these are only yours, you set those terms and conditions, you are completely in power of what you expect of yourself on the table and off the table. This is all you, and you own this yourself. Do not beat yourself up afterwards. Just butter up and go again. That's my advice.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us your wisdom with this. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Always a pleasure, my dude. My great honor to be on the venerable vanilla Art of War.
Venerable's definitely the word to describe this show. We can't do it without you folks. Thank you so much. It's been about 5 years of doing this show, and we are going to keep on trucking along. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you in part 2 where Adam and I discuss the brand new meta that we find ourselves in. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week. I hope you all have a wonderful, happy holiday season.
Boy.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.